Hey y'all, my name is Ann Wyatt. I started my career in workforce development with the state of Kentucky in 2010. That experience ignited a deep passion for manufacturing within me. I started this show hoping to raise more awareness around the bright outlook manufacturing careers have. Join me as I sit down with some of the manufacturing industry's most successful changemakers and learn how they're partnering people with technology. It's time to give people more meaningful work. This is Workforce 4.0. Hey y'all, this is your host, Ann Wyatt. Welcome back to another episode of Workforce 4.0. Thank you all so much for listening in this week. This week's guest is Josh Ebert from A3. And Josh is here today. He does a lot of educational content for A3. If you see their videos, if you see their webinars, if you see some of their educational materials for some of their certifications that they offer, Josh is behind all of that. And Josh and I met at Automate this year, which was an absolute pleasure. Josh, it was so great to meet more of the A3 team this year. But welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words and what you have been up to since the show.
Well, I found out that it never stops here. So as soon as the first show ends, we're already planning the next show. So that's what we've already been up to. One of the many things. We're already getting ready for next year and then continuing with kind of the quote unquote the day job, which my title here is Curriculum Development Manager. And just to, I guess, give credit where credit is due, I'm a pretty new face with A3. So I just came on in November. I haven't even been here a whole year. And so while I'm involved in all the things that you had rattled off there, we have a whole team of people that definitely does a lot of this stuff, like I said, from webinars to our trainings to our content. And so I'm just kind of beginning to get acclimated and get involved with those, to find ways to expand them, to do more of all those things. But a really big focus where I'll spend a majority of my time is with our online content, specifically in like the courses we're developing. So if anyone happens to be familiar with it, one of our big courses is our Certified Vision Professional course. It's an industry certification that people can take through us. And that's just a nice example. It's a multi-module online course through our LMS that people can enroll in, particularly our members, and then by the end get certified. So we're looking at doing more and more of that type of stuff, offering industry certifications and credentials like you mentioned, and just really finding ways to get more coursework, for lack of better words, available to people on the web.
Interesting. And I definitely want to talk a little bit more about that in depth because I think, you're seeing those shorter pathways to careers, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
That's something that we've seen over the past decade has really become a big focal point in training and manufacturing and workforce development, which is a big part of why I asked you to come on the show, because that obviously is a big factor behind the show in exploring those pathways. I think it's really interesting that you're taking such a content heavy approach to it, Josh, because you do develop all this educational content for YouTube, and there's a lot of advantages in that. I definitely want to cover more of that, but I really love the community aspect that A3 also brings to the table. It's like everybody gets together, everybody goes to a lot of the networking events, and everybody just it's like a family oriented environment that I think is very unique to A3.
Oh, yeah.
That really makes you all special.
Well, and I'm biased, but I agree 100%. I've felt very much like a family just from our own staff, our team of now almost 40 some and growing. It has just been an awesome organization getting involved with. But as I think you alluded to, it's more than just our staff of like A3 hired employees, but, we're a member, trade association of 1,300 member companies. And it's very, very cool to go to events like Automate where you'll run into someone and it almost feels like they're all employees of A3, and in a way they are, right? We're all members. So it is a very, very tight-knit community. I'm learning that quickly. It's phenomenal for networking, for getting out there, finding people that are passionate about anything in this industry. If you want to find something, there's someone out there who will talk to you and share their thoughts. And it's just a very, very cool, you said it, a community to be a part of.
It is. And, I've enjoyed working with Jana Martin over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
I cannot speak highly enough about Jana. I just love her. She's just the sweetest person. So I think it would be really cool if we could get like yourself and Jana
maybe together with some of the A3 crew and maybe go do a karaoke night one night.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
think
yeah.
she
No,
would be down? Would you be down for that, Josh?
yeah, yeah. I have not met anybody yet who has a bad thing to say about Jana. She is the bomb.com. Everyone loves her. And I would have to imagine, I would venture to guess that she is a mad karaokeer.
I bet she is. She's awesome. I just love her. But Josh, I gotta know, if we did go karaokeing, what song are you singing? What you
This is the
got? Because
dreaded question. Yeah.
Jana is definitely gonna bring the competition. I mean, she is. So what do you got to top that?
Well, I'm not even gonna try. Like you got to know when you've met your match. I'm not gonna try to outdo someone who is probably an epic karaokeer. I'm the type who goes with just a staple because I'm a horrible singer. I'm not a big karaokeer, so I'll go with something like like Eye of the Tiger, where like you hope that the crowd sings more than you do because they all know the words. That's kind of my strategy. Pick the things
Yeah.
that has a chorus that everybody knows, and you can kind of just mumble, and then they out sing you. So that's my strategy. But if I had to pick, a song, if I could sing and I could sing with like, epic professional vocalist voice, one of my favorites that would be a fun karaoke in a kind of, I guess, a dark way would be The Sound of Silence, but the remix by Disturbed. So I don't know if you're familiar.
Wow.
If you
Yeah.
haven't looked it up, this is raises a whole nother conversation that we could get into because I often debate with my friends whether covers can ever be better than the original. And I know that can be blasphemy to some people, but I think Disturbed's Sound of Silence might have outdone the original. So that's
Wow.
my long roundabout answer for you.
I mean, I have heard the Disturbed Sounds of Silence cover. I would get up there and sing with you too, Josh. You wouldn't be alone. I would get up there with you.
You can't do that because then you would enable me. I would lean to you and let you sing louder, and I'd kind of fall into the background, be like the backup singer. So you just would be enabling this fault. You got to let me just fail out there. Throw me into the stage and make it happen.
I don't know if I have the vocals to handle the Disturbed Sounds of Silence, though.
Yeah, yeah,
I
that
don't
is
know if I
true.
could do it, but I would try.
And that's what karaoke is all about, right? It's about trying. I think that's the part we lose sight of. You're not supposed to get up there because you're always amazing. It's about everyone getting up and taking a shot.
Are covers better than the original sometimes, though?
I think so. That's my bias, but you could start a big
here.
heated argument.
Yeah, you could. Oh God.
You're gonna have people that be chiming in the comments of your podcasts and saying like, "Wait a minute, this is how dare you bring that up?"
Like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I don't know. 10 years ago, I would have said covers can never be better than the original. I mean, that would have just ran all over me. And now I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes I've heard some covers that are actually pretty good. I don't know.
Is there like something distinct that happened in the last few years, or just in general? Like that now that there's more music out there, it's easier, more accessible. You just feel like you've heard more. Maybe the argument's stronger.
Maybe I've just chilled out, Josh. I don't know.
That could be it too, right? We all get a little more subdued as we get older, a little more like, this is not a battle worth fighting, whatever. Get off my lawn kind of thing, right?
That's me. That's me. That's
There
me.
you go.
I'm like, I don't care. Get off my yard. So I love that. What a great intro to this podcast. This is going to be so much fun. But the real reason why you're here with us today is to talk about the educational content and the impact that you all are making with A3 and what that looks like. So what does on-demand learning, like the YouTube videos, my kiddo's into that. I don't know if you hear that a lot, but he is always on YouTube, it seems like, but it's really easy for these younger generations to just pick up a tablet and learn in small incremental ways than in the traditional programs. So, but I want to hear from you as someone who does this. What does
as a quote
that
unquote
impact
authority
have?
on the matter?
Yes.
No. So
as someone that does this, what is the impact on the future?
So I guess maybe give a little context. I'll kind of go back to introduction mode. But prior to this, I most recently transitioned from a career technical education facility in Ohio. That's where I'm at. So I was in what we call the CTE world as an instructor in there. And prior to even instructing, I've always been in the education space, but I kind of wear two hats. I have a background in multimedia. That's actually what I went to college for. I never intended to be an educator. I didn't go I've got an older sister who that was her thing. She got done with high school. She went and became a teacher. She's what I call a real teacher. I'm like a poser. So I was in multimedia. I got into like learning design, instructional design. Worked with a company right out of college called Root Learning at the time. Now they're just Root Inc., not to be confused with the insurance company, but they basically were, an e-learning company. They made e-learning content for some of the biggest companies in the world. So it's always been an interest and a passion. I love learning. I love pedagogy. But then it finally turned into being an actual teacher. And I just bring all that up because everything you talked about is exactly what was happening, with young teenagers in today's age. So I taught juniors and seniors in high school, and so much of it is, tapping in as a teacher, tapping into what's available on the web and that's out there, kind of more just what I would call like real life learning. I think it's more engaging because a lot of these young learners see materials that they think, like that's an influencer, that's a real person versus a textbook or a scientist or a quote unquote instructor. So I think that is something that is just really changing the landscape. Because I don't know about you, but I'm guessing you grew up in a time where to get content, it was this multi-day affair, right? You would go to a library, you would rent a VHS or check out a book, or, I didn't even have the internet until I can't remember when, but, I didn't have it in my earliest years of education. Yeah, it's probably around then. We're probably similar age. I'm trying to remember the exact year we got like a computer. And then even after that, it took a while to get access to the internet. And obviously early internet didn't have all this content. So point of that is that like the availability of information has changed, which has then changed what kind of information people want to watch. And so, you mentioned your kid. That's what so many people are really fascinated by, is just this rapid world of constantly new information coming at us. And so we're trying to meet that as we being just educational professionals like myself, but then A3, like we're trying to find ways to get content out that becomes fresh and relevant, and that it stays fresh and relevant. So that's a whole nother conversation we might get into, is like, how quickly can we update this content? Even if we push something out tomorrow, how quickly does it potentially become obsolete or expired? And we need to quickly get it up to speed with the latest norms and conventions and information from the industry. So that rapid content you're talking about is I think critical. I think everyone needs to lean into it, love it or hate it. Even things like TikTok and Snapchat, these really, really, really short form videos are just full of valuable information that people can digest at their own convenience. And that's a huge, huge part of the learning process for most people. So I'll pause there because I could ramble forever, but I think the short answer is, yeah, like I said, it is critical content that we really believe in.
That's the Roots program that you're talking about. Is that Jeff Condrell?
No, actually, very funny. I just met Jeff. So this is.
You just met Jeff. Jeff was on the show.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if this is like, if I'm doing brand endorsement, I have his business card right here. So
I love Jeff.
It is funny that you are underscoring that thing we already talked about, this community. I'm realizing it's like you'll meet someone and you met someone else who met that someone. But no, so Root Learning is a company out of Sylvania, Ohio. That was where I said I interned right after college. They actually were recently acquired by Accenture. So they still operate under that name, but They're slowly kind of modifying their branding. But yeah, I met Roots, education company with Jeff, which is super cool. I'm very intrigued. I think we're going to be working with them on some fun stuff and finding ways to collaborate and explore some synergies.
Awesome. Yeah, he is great people. I had to ask because I was like, okay, I wonder if he is connected with Jeff, if this is Jeff that he's talking about. But yeah, no, Jeff is in that. His company is in Florida. So, yes, yep. But they're already doing some really cool things. They've got some great partnerships with like UR and some other companies. Of course, Jeff is former ABB. So, I don't know. It's just it was interesting. So I had to ask a little bit about that. I definitely think that there's a big demand for the content because of the realness factor, right? Like what you're saying. Like even if it's if it's an influence or whatever. I think being able to see it in practice versus just reading about it gives today's content a lot more context because I mean, you're right. Like internet came out and like, fourth grade, we didn't really have access to it at the house until middle school. And then it was dial up. And for the children.
Yeah, we all remember dial up.
And for the children, I play that noise for my
Yeah.
8-year-old, so he
I
understands
did
what
it in
real
the course I
horror
taught.
is.
It was a digital media class, the career tech, and we would often recap, old things, the evolution of technology, and I made them all listen. It's like, this is the sound that haunted me as a kid. Dial up, you would never understand. So it is something that is definitely a part of our history and shape the future, love it or hate it.
That's right. And I think it's interesting how we've advanced in content and education and how we've used the internet for sure. The one thing that I think is really important about short form training like this, if we can call it that, or creating
Sure.
educational content like this, is how accessible it makes learning for the future generations. Because before it was much harder, I think, to obtain a skill. And I think people would agree with that and then disagree with that. I think with our age group, with the employment laws being the way that they were, and started to transition growing up, I think that it was a lot less accessible to my generation, skilled
Well, and
trades
actually,
and learning.
yeah, no, I agree, and some of it too, I think, is a change in the model, right? Like you're talking about, but some of it's like the perception, right? That I had to always be careful talking about this when I was in career tech, but the reality was, growing up in a small community with a career tech school, there was a stigma around it, right? Like that those were, whether you want to call them the dirty jobs or whatever, right? That we had this illusion about maybe where we should be focusing our time and sending our kids. And not to say, I always want to be careful to clarify that I don't think anything's black and white, that it's right or wrong, that there's some truth in the middle, but there was an element of that was definitely wrong, right? That was a false narrative. And we're quickly realizing now we're all paying the price for that. That idea, you hear everyone say it, there's this skills gap, right? There's these, workforce needs that we can't meet. And sometimes because we were pushing everyone off to a 4-year college. And I'm someone who went to a 4-year college. So this is definitely not dinging on 4-year colleges. They have a place in our society. And for those who didn't get a chance, we actually talked about this at some of our Automate Live sessions. We were talking with Future Point of View, great organization to check out that's talking about AI and in some of its impact on education. But that idea that how do we change this now? And things like career tech are suddenly in the spotlight because it's us realizing, wow, this is something we immensely need as a society, right? And it will fill a skills gap, but also that this different model maybe works better. Send a student to a 2-year school, trade school, like what we've had, versus a 4-year college. Because, if you send them to a 4-year college, is some of that content becoming, stale by the end of their 4-year term? Or if you're someone like me, you might have done a little victory lap, had a 5th year. So how much more stale is it? So it just raises that content or that idea that, yeah, this content is now accessible and it should kind of drive how we're providing it to people, whether that's, easier training, online training, short form schooling, like 2-year programs, 1-year programs, micro credentials. But I do believe that accessibility and that rapid evolution is just essential to kind of where everything's going.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point about traditional education programs too, that I think the shorter programs are meeting a need where they cannot, because, when did machine vision become a thing?
Right. Yeah.
When did this become a thing where you would have a degree for this? So I think it's really easy to take some of this newer technology coming out, create micro credentials like you're saying, and deploy them in place of degree programs, because the technology is just rapidly evolving faster than I think traditional education programs can keep up with.
Well, I don't know if you remember when I was in probably around college, there's that viral YouTube piece that was called What You Know 4.0. And there was originally a What You Know 1.0, and it was, it kept evolving, but 4.0 was the one I really remember. And it was like a little kind of informational, fun, graphic-based piece. There's, a couple minutes, but basically it was trying to underscore like, oh my gosh, technology is changing so fast. And one of the things that sticks out, and of course I'm making up the actual data, and I don't remember, 10 years later, but the idea that it was like, by the time you graduate, 20 jobs will exist that didn't even exist when you started college, or that idea that like, how many countries will have the internet that don't have it now. And I think that stuff is, hitting on what you're talking about, that, and it's probably only gotten faster, right? Just it's speeding up exponentially. And so again, it really does emphasize that need to say we should be reconsidering how people learn and how some of these programs are structured. Again, it doesn't mean to do away with 4-year college. I'm not suggesting that, but it could raise the question of maybe what do you do during that 4-year college? And maybe do each year of college, do you get a micro-credential? And are you doing internships each year of college to begin to get real world application? Just questions like that, I think, are maybe going to shape what the formal education system looks like, at least, in our country.
What do you think? Because this is something that I'm coming across right now. I'm recruiting for an entry-level industrial engineer. So the client is coming to me and they're asking specifically for somebody that has just graduated with an engineering degree. And they're being very like, it doesn't matter what type of engineering degree it was. We just want to take them. We want to develop them. We want to work with them. A 4-year college, even like, 2-year technical degree, they're being super flexible. So, but when I've reached out to a lot of this younger generation, and this is something that, I think has been going on since I've started recruiting, when I'm reaching out to these fresh grads that are graduating with engineering degrees, a lot of them are choosing to go get their master's degree immediately.
Okay. Yeah.
And mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. And to me, this kind of raises some flags. And I'll tell you why, because this industry, manufacturing, is so hands-on and you have to have so much real walking a plant experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
To really advance your career. That's almost more important, I think, at that stage. But what is your hot take on that? This was not, I know this is unscripted, but this is something that I think we need to start talking about because it is just confusing.
Yeah.
And it's not helping our pipeline.
Right. And I'll 100%. And I'll give that caveat again that I don't have a magic looking glass that I can see into the future. I like to sometimes forecast or predict, but by no means am I the de facto voice of what is going to happen in the future or what is right or wrong now. But that is a challenge. And I think, there's a finite number of positions that would be at that maybe higher level, right? If you think of someone who requires a master's or a PhD versus like a 4-year program versus a 2-year, if you kind of laid out the whole gamut, there is a need for those, right? And actually, again, this is an interesting thing that came up a little bit on one of our Automate Live topics. Let's say out of every 10 people that go off to some form of schooling, one of them can be sort of the philosopher, the inventor, that person that's at the more philosophical level, the higher level.
That's right.
But not everyone. We need the practitioners. We need the doers. We need the managers. We need the, kind of mid-level people that connect the dots from the high up. That's the visionaries, the ideas, and bring them to life. If we don't have that, our ideas are going to sit in a vacuum and never go anywhere. And I think that's kind of what we're running into, right? We did for years, probably during you and I's, we sent so many people off to 4-year colleges. And I think that same thing happens. Like, well, now where are all the plumbers? Where are all the electricians? Where are all the people that keep our society running? Because we've sent a bunch of people off to get 4-year degrees that maybe we have too many of now. So I think it's a challenge. What do we do about it? That's always the harder question, because is it a pay issue? And could we go to your specific scenario where you're trying to find these recent grads and they're all opting for master's degrees? Is it because the workforce isn't being competitive enough? Are employers not offering enough to entice them? Is it more of a societal thing? Are these young adults scared, right? It's sometimes safer or can feel safer to stay in the academia because you're familiar with it. You've done it your whole life. You've spent 12 years of high school. It's like, I just stay here where I'm comfortable. I can ace tests. I do well. I don't know. I think it's probably a combination of these reasons, but one way or another, we have to find a prescription to those to help alleviate that and get people into the jobs that are needing filled right now.
Well, I know for sure we are definitely running into that mid-level block.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the frustration with manufacturers is currently.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That's an interesting conversation. I may make this like a whole new podcast episode, but so stay tuned.
Too much. Yeah, you got to split us into 2 episodes when I talk too much or brought up too much stuff.
No, I just want to ask you what your thought was, because it's really challenging. You're right. There is a very finite number of those positions. I don't want to upset anybody in the educational provider space.
Right.
But at
That's
the
where I'm
same
allowed to
time,
talk
that's
about it,
not
right?
solving. Yeah, at the same time, that's not solving our workforce problem. Sending all these kids to grad school, telling them they're going to make six figures when they get out. That's just not the case.
No, and it's
So
maybe somewhat into probably what you and I grew up with. I always joke about, like, we all wanted to be astronauts, or we wanted to be, professional NFL players, right? Like, there were these kind of pie in the sky things, and we were told you could be whatever you want to be when you grow up. But the reality is, not everyone can be. It physically would not work. If we're all pro football players, there would be pro football as we think of it. So that idea of being
that's right.
realistic. And who knows, neither you or I can say, maybe AI will drastically shift the landscape. We will be the ones being laughed at because all these higher level degrees will suddenly become essential. But that's not where my gut's at. That's not what I'm betting on. I do think we have to continue to, shift and try to drive these young adults to the right avenues. And I think it goes back to your question to try to help, because I know I can ramble, so I'll circle back. But that ability to make this stuff accessible, if we don't provide them a avenue, maybe going beyond accessible, maybe saying we need to help steer them, not just making it an option, but almost, this is going to be a touchy topic, but sort of forcing people or guiding them to the right paths where there's demand. Because you and I both know, you don't know what you don't know when you're young. Again, if you have that illusion of, I'm going to be a pro football player, well, what would a loving parent do? They'd say, hey, I want to try to nurture that dream. I want to try to,
Uh-huh.
not crush your aspirations, but I'm going to steer you toward what I think is realistic. And I think we as a society have to find ways to do that, to where it's like, hey, we want people to believe in these master's programs, and that is for someone, but here are these amazing opportunities now. Maybe we increase, our competitive wages to help that stuff appeal more. Maybe find ways to create those hybrid programs. And it goes back to that accessible information, where if we restructure our education system to where it doesn't require you to commit to a 2-year additional program. Like, I'm done with my 4-year degree, I've got to go off for another 2 years of a master's or something, but instead have a system that encourages these people to say, nope, actually our college, Bowling Green State University, where I went, says before you can even start in our master's program, we request that you have 2 years of real world experience, right? Like, if we would change models like that, it could still do both. People could still pursue masters, but we help coach them the way they need to be coached to say, hey, it's probably not realistic to jump right into a master's program when the data tells us we know you need real world experience and you should begin starting your career and getting that hands-on engagement. So I think there's ways that if we change that model, it could help address some of these concerns.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that. I like that spin on it. I like that, maybe we look at assessing candidates to be, grad school candidates before then, or some other type of process. That's really interesting. Yeah, I could see that in the future for sure. But for those companies that are wanting to take a more proactive approach on creating their own educational content, I think a lot of companies are doing that.
Yeah.
I think they're kind of really leveraging educational content for their own YouTube, for their own marketing. It's been really cool to watch. But as somebody that does this, what are your top 3 tips for companies that are interested in leveling up their content game?
Yeah. Well, I think, like anything, a good approach, assuming that they're starting from scratch, right? Start small. We even deal with these same challenges as A3. We're trying to assess the landscape, find out what content is most valuable, right? Where should we put our time and energy, which is limited, to create the most valuable value for our members and possible future members of the industry? So I think that idea of, again, be willing to start small, try to tailor those expectations. They'll say, tomorrow we're going to take all of our content online. And for context, I've worked prior to A3, worked with consulting on a number of other companies in this space. And this is stuff that, I'll leave brands out of it, but there's one particular company, a large, one of the big names in terms of robotics manufacturers. And they were doing this 10 years ago, right? Like, beginning to take classroom manuals, right? Things that were 3-hour in-person instructor-led courses. And they were beginning to get those digital, to turn them into e-learning content, to make, like you said, modular chunks that would be stuff that would be available for marketing to use, on their channels and social. So years ago, they were trying to prepare for what we're dealing with now. So it can be naive as a company to jump in and say, we're going to be there tomorrow. If you haven't started, start small. And then I kind of already alluded to probably the second thing is, really be willing to step back and ask critical questions about what content is going to have the biggest payoff. And I don't necessarily mean monetarily, But in terms of the skills gap we're looking at, like what things will move the needle quickest to begin to get, let's just say this theoretical future employee or an existing employee, like the incumbent workforce, someone who maybe needs to be upskilled or reskilled within your company to do something else. What things will have the most gains quickly? And it doesn't mean, again, at the end of the day, there's no way around it. It's like physics. You can't defy gravity. If you know that a person needs 10 skills to be ready for job X, realistically, one or two of those skills would probably allow them to start getting that hands-on experience that you and I were just talking about, right? That says, hey, I can at least start, operating the robot, right? Programming the PLC, doing whatever to begin to be able to then simultaneously continue my learning while I'm beginning to apply my initial things. Versus if you start at, like, let's say the theoretical, if one of those 10 skills they need is more of a theoretical or conceptual, if you start with that, well, they then have to wait before they can, attempt any application or practical knowledge. So I think that's kind of the second thing, being really strategic about what content will get someone, implemented quickly. And again, not full implementation, but just that allows them to start putting some new skills into action. I think that's where that idea, I'll try not to go off on tangent, but that idea of micro-credentialing, right? Look at these little nuggets you can break out that says, here's something that you could take a crash course on. Maybe you can hop out to a plant floor for a day and have some skill that you can start applying while you continue your learning. And then I think that third thing is too, just maybe what we already alluded to in a really roundabout way, but being realistic about, when you're looking at reskilling or looking at the next, generation of workforce, what are we doing as companies and institutions to, I'm going to say incentivize that? It doesn't always have to be monetary, but thinking about, like, why would someone do this? Just because you, the company, wants it doesn't mean it's valuable to the worker, right? It has to be something where they meet in the middle and it has value to both parties. And so I'm going to use more of a reskilling example. We have a lot of companies who I'm certain would want employee X or Y to go and get a new skill tomorrow. If you don't pay them more, just being critical, what's in it for them? Why would they go do it? And some of these companies can't, right? That is not an option. The budget is not there. So are there other things you can do to, add value, to encourage them, whether it's promotions, management opportunities, creative things like, just the perks of the job or flexibility that come with it. Maybe it's a new skill that offers them some ability to work remote, right? Like just thinking through what's the value proposition that you can offer to, again, these incumbent workforce people who need to upskill, or that college person, right? The master's program person. What can you do to say, why don't you pause that master program? Come take an internship with us, and here's why. Here's our sales proposition. So I think those three things.
I think it's really. I think a value proposition for companies is really important. I think a lot of them try to do that. I just don't know that their execution is super great and like their messaging is great. I do think that offering like some sort of incentive like that would be great. And I love the point that you made about knowing where your real ROI on the training program is. Like what is going to be the most beneficial and get you from point A to point B in the fastest amount. Is that something that, the answer to this is obviously yes, but like that's something that I think is a two-way street, right? I think that we need to explain that to the companies, but we also need to explain that to the next generation of workforce too, really understanding like what your options are.
Yeah. And you said it much more elegantly, much more succinctly than me, but yeah, I think ROI is just a great way to capture it, right? Like we're all going to have to invest something. There's no way around that part, but how do you invest in the things that get you a return quicker? Or at least allow you to start recouping that return. So, if you go off with a 4-year degree, let's say going on to a PhD, right? Maybe an 8-year program, 4 years after your first 4 years, you're not going to start paying that off until year 8, right? But is this, again, this model, and I'm biased. My program, which again was not from manufacturing, was not from automation. I was, digital media is basically my background. My program required students. It required. You could not graduate without performing 3 co-ops, basically their fancy word for internships. And I was annoyed by it at the time. Don't get me wrong. Kudos to my teachers if they're listening. But it was such a payoff because each summer between my, book work, if you will, right? Your traditional college, I was getting that hands-on experience that we're talking about. I was getting it each summer. And then it's this nice leapfrog effect where it's like, I would then take that back the next year of coursework and think, oh, I did this at this internship, or I experienced this, or I had this challenge. And then I'd be able to learn about that and then go back, right? That nice yin yang kind of yo-yo effect was, I think, super valuable. So how do we kind of integrate that into this model to where they can start getting some of that with the investment? Invest a year, get a little return. Invest a year, get a little return.
Yeah, so very interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about, I did like a internship for the city of Bowling Green, Kentucky.
A different Bowling Green, yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, but
That's
I was
the
thinking
real Bowling
about,
Green.
that is the real Bowling Green, my God.
It
No,
is.
I
That's
don't
actually
know. But
there's a funny history there, but Bowling Green, Ohio, actually took it from Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's the history I heard. But I interrupt you.
did it
Continue.
really?
It's something. Well, not like stole.
Well, I was thinking about it. What's interesting about that project was that was the first labor market information profile I'd ever made. That was the first time that I'd done any analytics on labor market information. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, you were just cutting your
Really.
teeth.
I was just cutting my teeth. And we had a really great city manager. He taught one of my classes, and I asked him if I could come intern for him. So he put me to work with this project, and
Yeah,
that's where I learned how to calculate demographics and all that good stuff. How to like launch surveys.
yeah.
How to analyze information and data. That was an interesting experience. And I've just been doing it ever since.
Yeah. Well, it's just a great example again of that idea of like you can only do so much in the theoretical, right? The coursework, the book work. At some point, you have to apply it. And so I think you realize that firsthand that, that was your opportunity where the rubber hit the road, right? Where it's like you were actually applying and having that aha moment of, oh, this makes sense now. I'm seeing it. And maybe we just aren't doing enough of that right now with
that's my thing. I mean, this whole time I was in class talking about, theory and all this, and, none of this really made sense to me. And then I was like, this is, and then I went and did and executed this project, planned and executed everything. And then I was like, this cannot be like all of the hours that I spent in class.
Right. There has to be more to this, right? Something else. Why am I doing
Where's
this?
the catch? There has to be more to this.
Yeah.
There's no, like.
Yeah. And I'm super biased, but I think that Ohio, where I taught, has a phenomenal model, and they are just pushing hard for career tech. Now, again, we're just talking at the, this is the high school level. I know there's more to the narrative, but they're starting early, and that's maybe another like a fourth piece of advice to the tips for companies. We the school where I'm from, Tri Rivers, was really good about partnering with local institutions. Honda had one of their large manufacturing facilities nearby in Marysville, Ohio, and they would be working with our robotics engineering program, coming in, being willing to speak, that go into that investment, right? Investing in these kids.
Yeah.
And then the return for them was we would have students graduating from high school with the skills they needed to go work at Honda, right? And so these companies, if there's something nearby to you, whether it's a career technical institution, even if it's a local high school, what can you do to go in during a jobs day and make kids aware of these careers they may not know about? Like find ways as a company to invest in the youth.
See, I think that advice is gold above all else, Love to hear it. Love to hear it, Josh. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate your time, Josh. For everyone that is out in the audience that wants to learn more about the initiatives with educational content that you're providing through A3, what's a good point of contact for you?
I'll actually share two. You can contact education@automate.org. So, just if it's easier to remember, if you don't remember my name or anything, just, hey, education@automate.org. That is our kind of team email. You're welcome to send inquiries or leads or ideas, whatever you want, to that email. If you want to follow up with me directly, my email is jebert@automate.org. So no periods or dashes or punctuation, just the J for Josh and then EBERT@automate.org.
Awesome. And I will link your LinkedIn profile in the notes as well. Is that okay?
Fantastic. Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation today. If you're listening and you have some thoughts on the future of work, education, and short-term credentials versus four-year degrees, I know this is about to be a hot topic. Leave those in the comments for us, and we will see you all next week on another episode of Workforce 4.0.
Thank you.